Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. It started like any other night out in the fields. I remember thinking to myself that it had been years since I'd had a peaceful evening under the stars, ever since I moved back to the reservation to help out with my family. My name is Leon Tall Pine, from the Northern Cheyenne. After years working construction in Denver, I came home when my father fell ill. It felt good to be back on the land, even if it wasn't the carefree life I once had. That night I was out looking for a stray horse. She had wandered off sometime during the afternoon, and I didn't think much of it until dusk began to settle in. It was foolish, really, to leave without a flashlight, but I knew these fields like the back of my hand. The horse wasn't hard to find either, or at least that's what I thought at first. The tracks led me deep into the backcountry, to a place where the land swelled into rolling hills and dense clusters of trees. It was a quiet, untouched area, far from the roads and the small clusters of homes. I caught a glimpse of her just past a patch of willows, her dark shape standing out against the light of the rising moon. I remember whistling to her, a low, friendly sound that normally got her attention. But that night she didn't react at all. She was facing the other direction, ears pinned back in fear. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed something was wrong. Her body was trembling and she wasn't alone. At first I couldn't quite make out what was next to her. It looked like a large dog or a wolf standing unusually still. But as I got closer I realized it was something else entirely. The thing beside her was hunched over, its shape twisted and unnatural. It wasn't like any animal I had ever seen before. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart hammering in my chest. Whatever it was big, nearly as tall as the horse's back, with long limbs that bent in angles that shouldn't have been possible. Its skin, if you could call it that, was leathery and stretched too tight over its bones. And then there was its head. The thing's face was elongated, like that of a coyote, but grotesquely warped. Its jaws were too wide, almost unhinged, filled with jagged teeth like a shark. I watched as it hovered over the horse, its mouth grazing the mare's neck as if deciding where to bite. I felt sick, like the world had shifted under my feet. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't leave her like that. I grabbed a rock, the nearest thing I could find, and hurled it as hard as I could. It struck the creature with a dull thud, and that's when it turned to face me. Its eyes. No, I won't describe them. There was something wrong with its gaze. A depthless, hungry void that made my blood run cold. But more than that, it was the way it moved. When it turned towards me, it wasn't with the smooth motion of an animal. Its body jerked and snapped like a broken marionette, its limbs twisting as if they didn't quite belong to it. And then it started toward me. I didn't think. I ran. The horse bolted in the opposite direction, thank God, but I could hear the creature closing in behind me. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air. But I didn't dare look back. I could feel it getting closer, that horrible scraping sound of its claws digging into the earth. Just when I thought it would catch me, I saw the outline of my truck up ahead, parked near a low hill where the trees thinned out. I threw myself toward it, scrambling into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut just as something heavy crashed into the side. The whole truck shook violently, but I managed to get the key in the ignition and peel out of there, tires screeching against the dirt. I didn't stop until I was back at my house, heart still pounding. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even pull my phone out to call anyone. For a long time I just sat there in the dark, engine idling, wondering what the hell I had just seen. The next morning I convinced myself it had been some kind of nightmare, maybe a trick of the light, maybe exhaustion, anything but the truth. But then I got a call from my cousin Bill, who lived a few miles away. He was frantic. Said one of his dogs had gone missing overnight, and there were strange tracks around his property. When I went over to check it out, I saw the same twisted prints I had seen near the willows. Long clawed impressions that didn't belong to any known animal. And there, near the edge of the woods, we found his dog, or what was left of it. It was torn apart, as if something had ripped it to shreds. I tried to explain it away, but deep down I knew what I had seen the night before was real. Over the next few days, more animals went missing. People started whispering about strange noises in the night, about shadows moving where they shouldn't be. Some of the elders talked about an old legend, a creature that stalked the plains in times of great darkness. They said it was a spirit, born from the earth itself, twisted by the suffering of the land. But this wasn't a spirit. Spirits don't leave bodies behind. They don't kill. It was a week later when it happened again. I was out by the river trying to clear my head. The horse had returned home shaken but unharmed, and I figured maybe it was all behind me. But as I sat there watching the water flow by, I felt that familiar, horrible presence creeping up on me. This time, there was no doubt. The creature was back. It moved silently, its body almost blending into the shadows of the trees. But I saw it, and this time it didn't wait. It lunged at me with terrifying speed, jaws snapping open wide enough to swallow my head whole. I barely managed to dive out of the way, grabbing a fallen branch to fend it off. We fought there by the riverbank, the creature snarling and snapping at me with those awful teeth. I swung the branch as hard as I could, but it was like hitting stone. The thing didn't even flinch. It was like it was toying with me, enjoying the game, but I wasn't about to go down without a fight. As it lunged again, I saw my chance. There was a sharp rock jutting out of the ground nearby. I grabbed it, and as the creature came at me, I drove it into its neck with all my strength. It let out a horrible screech, a sound that still haunts me, and staggered back. Black blood poured from the wound, and the thing collapsed to the ground, twitching violently. I didn't stick around to watch it die. I ran, blood still on my hands, until I reached the nearest road and flagged down a passing car. When I went back later with a few friends from the reservation, the body was still there, twisted and broken, just like I had left it. We buried it deep, far away from any homes or roads, hoping that would be the end of it. No one talked about it after that. We all knew what we had seen, but no one wanted to admit it out loud. And for a while things were quiet. But sometimes when I'm out alone, I still get that feeling, that horrible sense that something is out there watching me. But that's all in the past now. The creature's body didn't vanish into the night. It's still buried out there under the ground, a grim reminder that some things aren't just stories. Some things are real, and they don't just go away. The weeks following the incident by the river were tense. Word spread quickly through the reservation, despite our efforts to keep things quiet. People started locking their doors at night, something we'd rarely done before. Children weren't allowed to play outside after dark. The elders held council meetings, discussing old stories and what they might mean for us now. I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but the memory of that creature haunted me. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the grass made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow, some way that thing was still out there. It was about a month after the river incident when the disappearances started. At first it was just livestock, a few chickens here, a goat there. But then people's dogs started going missing. And then, on a cold Tuesday night, little Jimmy Redhawk didn't come home from his friend's house. The whole community came together to search. We combed every inch of the reservation, called in help from the county sheriff, even brought in a team with search dogs. But it was like Jimmy had vanished into thin air. His parents were beside themselves with grief and worry. As the days stretched on with no sign of Jimmy, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. I knew deep down what had taken him, the same thing that had nearly gotten me twice now, the creature we thought we'd killed and buried. I decided to go back to where we'd buried it, just to be sure. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want to scare them, and part of me hoped I was wrong. The burial site was in a remote part of the reservation, far from any homes or well-traveled paths. As I approached, my heart sank. The ground where we'd buried the creature was disturbed, a gaping hole where its body should have been. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, when I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see those terrible eyes again. Instead, I found myself face to face with Old Man Broken Feather, one of the eldest members of our tribe. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Leon," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked, still on edge. He gave me a knowing look. "The spirits told me. They've been restless lately. I think you know why." I nodded, unable to find the words to express the dread I felt. Old Man Broken Feather sighed heavily. What you're dealing with, it's called a skinwalker in some tribes. We have our own name for it, one we don't speak aloud. It's an evil that's as old as these lands. But what is it? How do we stop it? I asked, desperate for answers. It's not just a creature, Leon. It's a curse. Born from pain, fed by fear. The more afraid people are, the stronger it gets. And right now, our people are terrified. I thought about little Jimmy, about all the animals that had gone missing. So what do we do? Old Man Broken Feather placed a gnarled hand on my shoulder. We fight, not with weapons, but with courage, with unity. The creature thrives on isolation and fear. We must bring our people together, make them strong. Over the next few days, we put Old Man Broken Feather's plan into action. We held tribal meetings, sharing the truth about what was happening. Some people were skeptical, others were terrified, but slowly we began to come together. We organized night watches, made sure no one was ever alone, especially after dark. But the creature wasn't going to give up easily. Attacks became more frequent, more brazen. It seemed to be everywhere at once, striking fear into the heart of our community. And still, there was no sign of Jimmy. It all came to a head on a moonless night about a week later. I was on watch with my cousin Bill when we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the direction of the Red Hawk house. We ran as fast as we could, other members of the watch joining us as we went. When we arrived, the scene was chaos. The front door had been ripped off its hinges, and inside we could hear the sounds of a struggle. Without thinking, I charged in, Bill right behind me. The creature was there in the living room, its twisted form hunched over Mrs. Red Hawk. Mr. Red Hawk lay unconscious in the corner. But what caught my eye was the small figure huddled behind the couch, Jimmy, alive but terrified. The creature turned to face us, its eyes gleaming with that terrible hunger. But this time I didn't run. I stood my ground, and so did Bill, and the others who had followed us in. We formed a line, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the monster together. For a moment everything was still. Then with an ear-splitting shriek, the creature lunged at us. But we were ready. We fought with everything we had, fists, improvised weapons, pure determination. It was a brutal fight, the creature's inhuman strength nearly overwhelming us several times. But slowly, something began to change. With each blow we landed, with each moment we stood our ground, the creature seemed to weaken. Its form began to waver like a mirage in the desert heat, and then, just as it lunged for one final attack, it simply dissolved. One moment it was there, terrible and real, and the next it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a foul-smelling mist that quickly dissipated. We stood there in shock, barely able to believe what had just happened. Mrs. Red Hawk was the first to move, rushing to embrace Jimmy, who ran sobbing into her arms. Mr. Red Hawk began to stir in the corner. Outside we could hear the voices of more community members arriving, drawn by the commotion. In the days that followed, we pieced together what had happened. Jimmy, it turned out, had been taken by the creature that first night, but had managed to escape. He'd been hiding, terrified and alone, for weeks, occasionally stealing food to survive. The creature had been hunting him, and in its final desperate attempt to recapture him, it had overextended itself. Old Man Broken Feather explained it to us later. The creature, this skinwalker, fed on fear and isolation. By coming together, by facing it as a united community, we had starved it of its power source. In the end, our courage and unity had been stronger than its malevolence. The reservation slowly returned to normal, though none of us would ever forget what had happened. We became closer as a community, more willing to help each other, to stand together in times of trouble. The night watches continued for a while, but gradually, as no more signs of the creature appeared, they became more of a social gathering than a necessity. As for me, I still sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of those terrible eyes fresh in my mind. But then I remember that night, standing with my people, facing down our fears together. And I know that whatever comes, whatever darkness might threaten us, we'll face it the same way, united, strong, unafraid. Because that's who we are. That's what it means to be Cheyenne. And no monster, no matter how ancient or powerful, can take that away from us. The wind howled against the cracked windows of my old truck as I drove down the lonely stretch of highway. A thick fog clung to the road, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I could feel the weight of the letter in my jacket pocket, a reminder of why I was here. You see, I grew up on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, and I hadn't been back in almost 10 years. My job had taken me all over the country, which wasn't exactly popular among my people. But I was good at it. It paid the bills. My name's Tawa Nighthawk. I guess I've always been the quiet type, more comfortable in the wilderness than in cities. My father used to say I had the spirit of a hawk, always soaring alone above the world. He wasn't wrong. I got a call a few days ago from a friend, Pete Runs Deep, telling me that my cousin Charlie had gone missing while hunting in the Badlands. I didn't know Charlie well, but family is family. Pete said the police had already called off the search, figuring Charlie had gotten lost or fallen into a ravine. But Pete didn't buy it, and honestly, neither did I. Charlie was one of the best trackers I knew. Something wasn't right. I pulled off the highway and onto a dirt road that led into the Badlands. The land was rough, desolate. Sharp rock formations jutted from the ground like broken teeth. There were no trees, just endless stretches of jagged earth and hidden valleys. It wasn't a place you wandered into without knowing how to survive, but Charlie did. I arrived at Pete's camp just as the sun was starting to disappear behind the ridges. The sky was painted in deep reds and purples, the kind of beauty that could turn dangerous in a heartbeat. Pete was waiting for me by a fire. He was an older man now, his hair streaked with silver, but he still had the fierce look of a warrior. "You made it," he said, offering me a cup of coffee. "Yeah," I replied, taking the cup. "Any news?" He shook his head. "No, nothing. But I found some tracks near where Charlie's camp was. They're not human, and I don't think they're any animal I've ever seen." I raised an eyebrow. Pete was a seasoned hunter, someone who could identify almost any creature by its tracks alone. If he didn't recognize them, that meant trouble. "What do you think it is?" I asked. Pete looked into the fire for a long time before answering. "There are old stories, you know, about things in these lands, creatures from the old world before the white man came. My grandmother used to talk about them, spirits that walked the earth in the form of animals, but not animals like we know them." "Come on, Pete," I said, though I could feel a shiver run down my spine. "That's just talk, legends." He shrugged. "Maybe, but whatever took Charlie isn't a legend." The next morning we set out early. We followed the riverbed for a while, then cut into the valleys. The tracks Pete had found were easy to follow, deep clawed prints that sunk into the soft earth. They were spaced far apart, like whatever made them had a long stride. I kept my rifle slung over my shoulder, but the weight of it didn't feel like much comfort. The deeper we went, the more I felt like we were being watched. Every now and then I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows that seemed to shift and twist with the wind. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. After a few hours of hiking, we reached a clearing. That's when we found the first body. It wasn't Charlie. The body was torn apart, limbs scattered across the clearing like some kind of twisted offering. I knelt down to get a closer look, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's face was frozen in terror, his skin pale and drained of blood. "Coyotes?" Pete asked, though he didn't sound convinced. I shook my head. "No, this is something else." There were deep gashes in the man's chest, like he'd been raked by claws the size of my hand. His throat was torn open, but it wasn't just a kill. It was like whatever did this had played with him first. We didn't linger. Pete suggested we head back to the camp and call for more help, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. There was no one else coming. The police had already written it off, and I wasn't about to let whatever did this get away, not with Charlie still out there, alive or dead. As we pushed deeper into the Badlands, the sense of unease grew stronger. I started noticing things, small, almost imperceptible details. The way the rocks seemed to shift when you weren't looking, the faint sound of something breathing just beyond the range of your hearing. Then we found Charlie's camp. It was abandoned, his gear scattered around like he'd left in a hurry. There was no sign of him, but there were more tracks, fresh ones. And this time, they were joined by drag marks. Something had been pulled away from the camp. Something heavy. We followed the trail until we reached a narrow canyon, the walls rising high above us. The tracks led inside, and I knew we didn't have a choice. If Charlie was in there, this was our last chance to find him. The canyon was dark, the air cold and damp. The walls seemed to close in as we moved deeper, and the sound of our footsteps echoed back at us in strange, distorted ways. Every now and then I'd hear a scuttling noise above us, like something was moving just out of sight. Then we saw it. It was perched on a ledge high above us, its massive form hunched over like a gargoyle. Its skin was mottled and rough, like the hide of a boar, but its limbs were long and twisted, ending in jagged claws. It had the body of a predator, muscular and built for killing, but its face, it was almost human, though horribly disfigured, as if someone had tried to carve a wolf out of a man. I raised my rifle, but Pete grabbed my arm. It's not going to be that easy. The creature leaped down from the ledge, landing with a heavy thud. It stood there for a moment, staring at us with its head tilted to the side like it was trying to figure out what we were. Then it charged. I barely had time to react. I fired a shot, hitting it in the shoulder, but it didn't even slow down. Pete was knocked to the ground as the creature barreled into him, its claws ripping into his side. I screamed and fired again, this time aiming for its chest. The bullet hit, and the creature let out a sound that I can only describe as a cross between a howl and a scream. It stumbled back, clutching its chest, black blood oozing between its fingers. But it wasn't done. It lunged at me, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. I dodged to the side and slammed the butt of my rifle into its head. It staggered, dazed, and that was all the opening I needed. I fired one last shot, point blank, into its chest. The creature let out a final wheezing breath before collapsing to the ground. Pete was still alive, though just barely. His side was torn open and blood was pouring out in thick streams. I did my best to patch him up, but we both knew it was a losing battle. "I told you," he whispered, his voice weak. "Old stories." I didn't say anything. I just sat there holding his hand as the light slowly left his eyes. By the time I got out of the canyon, it was dark. I managed to get Pete's body back to the camp, though I left the creature where it fell. I wasn't about to drag that thing with me. They believed me when I got back. How could they not, with Pete's body torn apart the way it was? The police came, took statements, but they didn't go into the canyon. They didn't want to know what was in there. As for the creature, I don't know what it was. Maybe one of the old spirits Pete's grandmother talked about. Maybe something else. All I know is it's dead now, and it's not coming back. And that's enough for me. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews and funeral preparations. Pete's family insisted on a traditional burial, and I couldn't argue. He deserved to be laid to rest according to our customs, to have his spirit guided back to the ancestors. The ceremony was held at sunset, the sky ablaze with the same colors as the night we set out to find Charlie. As the elders sang the ancient songs, I found myself thinking about Charlie. We never did find him, not really. The police discovered what was left of his body in a cave not far from where we encountered the creature. They said it looked like he'd been dead for days, but I knew better. The wounds were fresh, the blood barely dry. Whatever that thing was, it had been keeping him alive, feeding on him slowly. The thought made my stomach churn. After the funeral, I stayed on the reservation for a while. I told myself it was to help with the investigation, to make sure Charlie's family got the closure they deserved. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid to leave. Afraid that if I went back to my life in the city, I'd start to doubt what I'd seen, that I'd convince myself it was all just a stress-induced hallucination, a product of grief and exhaustion. But I couldn't stay forever. The reservation had changed in the years I'd been gone, or maybe I had. The familiar faces of my childhood now looked at me with suspicion, like I was an outsider who'd brought trouble to their doorstep. I couldn't blame them. In a way, they were right. So, I packed up my truck and hit the road again. I had no destination in mind, just a need to keep moving. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of America. I drove for days, stopping only when exhaustion threatened to take over. It was on one of these stops, at a rundown motel on the outskirts of some nameless town in Nebraska, that I got the call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Tawa," The voice on the other end was gruff, unfamiliar. "This is Sheriff Red Cloud from the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. We've got a situation here that, well, it sounds a lot like what happened with your cousin." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "People gone missing, tracks we can't identify, and last night one of my deputies." He trailed off, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "Look, I know it sounds crazy, but word gets around in Indian country. They say you've dealt with something like this before." I wanted to hang up, to tell him he had the wrong number, that I didn't know anything about monsters or missing people. But I couldn't. The image of Charlie's mangled body flashed through my mind, followed by Pete's final moments. "I'll be there in a day," I said, already grabbing my keys. As I pulled out of the motel parking lot, the sun was just starting to rise. The sky was a pale, sickly yellow, like a bruise that hadn't quite healed. I thought about turning around, about driving in the opposite direction until I ran out of road, but I knew I couldn't. Whatever was out there, whatever had taken Charlie and killed Pete, it wasn't done, and neither was I. The drive to Wind River was long and monotonous. Miles of cornfields gave way to rolling hills, which eventually became the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. I tried to keep my mind focused on the road, on the practical details of what I might face when I got there. But my thoughts kept drifting back to that canyon, to the creature's twisted face and inhuman strength. I arrived at the Wind River Reservation just as night was falling. Sheriff Red Cloud was waiting for me at the tribal police station, a weathered man with deep-set eyes and a perpetual frown. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. 3 people missing in the last month, he said, spreading out a map on his desk. All disappeared from this area here near the old uranium mines. I leaned in, studying the terrain. It was rough country, all steep cliffs and narrow valleys, perfect hunting ground for something that didn't want to be seen. "Any bodies?" I asked, dreading the answer. Red Cloud shook his head. "Not yet, but we found this yesterday." He pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a scrap of cloth dark with dried blood. But it wasn't the blood that caught my attention. It was the claw marks, 4 parallel slashes that had torn through the fabric like it was tissue paper. "Jesus," I muttered. "Yeah," Red Cloud agreed. "Whatever did this, it ain't natural. That's why I called you. The FBI's sending a team, but they won't be here until tomorrow. And I've got a feeling we don't have that long." I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. "All right, let's go hunting." We set out at first light, a small team consisting of me, Red Cloud, and 2 of his most experienced deputies. The plan was to sweep the area around the mines, looking for any sign of the missing people or the creature that took them. The landscape was eerily similar to the Badlands where Charlie had disappeared. The same jutting rock formations, the same hidden valleys that could conceal all manner of horrors. As we hiked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that twisted face leering at me from behind a boulder. We'd been searching for hours when one of the deputies, a young guy named Running Bear, called out, "Sheriff, over here!" We rushed over to where he was standing, at the mouth of what looked like an old mine shaft. The entrance was partially collapsed, but there was a gap big enough for a person to squeeze through, and on the ground in front of it were tracks, the same deep clawed prints I'd seen in South Dakota. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's in there." Red Cloud pulled out his radio. "I'm calling for backup. We'll set up a perimeter and wait for the FBI team." I shook my head. "There's no time. If there are people in there, they might not have until tomorrow. So what, we just go in there? The 4 of us against God knows what?" Red Cloud's voice was incredulous. I met his gaze, saw the fear and uncertainty there. "You called me for a reason, Sheriff. This is what I do." He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. No heroes." We geared up as best we could with what we had. Flashlights, extra ammo, first aid kits. I insisted we bring road flares. Fire had seemed to hurt the creature before, and I wasn't taking any chances. The mine shaft was dark and oppressive, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something rotten. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the enclosed space. We'd gone maybe 100 yards when the tunnel opened up into a larger cavern. Our flashlights swept across the space, revealing abandoned mining equipment, rusted and decaying. And then, in the far corner, we saw them. 3 bodies, or what was left of them, piled like discarded trash. I heard Running Bear retch behind me, but I couldn't look away. It was worse than Charlie, worse than anything I'd seen before. These people hadn't just been killed, they'd been consumed. "Oh God," Red Cloud whispered. "We need to get out of here, call in the military or something." But before anyone could move, we heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then, emerging from a tunnel on the far side of the cavern, came the creature. It was bigger than the one in South Dakota, its muscles rippling under its mottled hide as it moved. Its face was the same twisted mockery of humanity, but its eyes were intelligent, filled with a malevolent awareness that chilled me to my core. For a moment everything was still. Then all hell broke loose. The creature charged, moving faster than anything that size had any right to. Red Cloud and his deputies opened fire, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I saw bullets hit, saw black blood spraying from wounds, but it didn't slow down. I dove to the side as it barreled past, feeling the rush of air as its claws missed me by inches. It slammed into Running Bear, sending him flying across the cavern. He hit the wall with a sickening crunch and didn't get up. The other deputy, a woman whose name I hadn't caught, was backing up, still firing. But her shots were going wide, panic making her aim sloppy. The creature turned towards her, its mouth opening to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I didn't think, I just acted. I pulled out one of the road flares, struck it, and hurled it at the creature. The flare hit its back, igniting its hide. The monster let out a horrific screech, thrashing wildly as flames spread across its body. The deputy took advantage of the distraction, emptying her clip into the creature's chest. It staggered, black blood pouring from multiple wounds, but it wasn't going down. Its eyes, filled with rage and pain, locked onto me. "Run!" I yelled, already sprinting towards one of the smaller tunnels. I could hear the creature's labored breathing behind me, the sound of its claws scraping against rock. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I hoped it would slow the monster down. I emerged into another cavern, this one smaller than the last. There was no other exit. I was trapped. I turned, raising my rifle, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The creature burst into the cavern, its skin still smoldering from the flare. It was wounded badly, but the look in its eyes told me it wasn't about to give up. We faced each other, predator and prey, in a standoff that couldn't last. It lunged. I fired. The bullet caught it in the shoulder, spinning it around, but its momentum carried it forward, and I felt a searing pain as its claws raked across my chest. I fell back, my vision blurring from the pain. The creature loomed over me, its jaws opening wide. This was it. I was going to die in this godforsaken hole, torn apart like Charlie and the others. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it never came. Instead, I heard a familiar voice shouting, "Get down!" I rolled to the side just as a massive explosion rocked the cavern. When I looked up, I saw Red Cloud standing in the entrance, a bundle of dynamite in his hand. The creature was on the ground, most of its lower body obliterated by the blast. Red Cloud rushed over to me, helping me to my feet. "Thought you could use a hand," he said, a grim smile on his face. "Where did you get dynamite?" I asked, wincing as the movement pulled at my wounds. "Old mining tunnels," he shrugged. "Figured it might come in handy." We both turned to look at the creature. It was still alive, somehow, its ruined body twitching on the cavern floor. Its eyes, filled with hate and something that might have been fear, locked onto us. Red Cloud raised his pistol, aiming at its head. "This ends now," he said. The gunshot echoed through the cavern, and finally, mercifully, the creature was still. The aftermath was a blur of federal agents, hazmat teams, and endless debriefings. The official story was that we'd stumbled upon an illegal chemical dump that had driven local wildlife insane. Nobody wanted to hear about monsters or spirits or things that shouldn't exist. Running Bear didn't make it. The woman deputy, whose name I learned was Susan Blackhawk, was hospitalized but expected to recover. Red Cloud took early retirement, saying he'd seen enough for one lifetime. As for me, I stuck around Wind River for a while, helping with the cleanup and trying to make sense of what had happened. But eventually, the road called to me again. There were rumors of strange happenings in other parts of the country. other reservations, and I knew that if I didn't investigate, nobody would. So I hit the highway once more, my truck pointed towards the next mystery, the next threat. I don't know if I'll ever understand what these creatures are or where they come from. But I do know one thing. As long as they're out there, hurting people, I'll be there to stop them. The sun was setting as I crossed the state line, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. In the rearview mirror, I could see the mountains of Wind River fading into the distance. Ahead of me, the road stretched on, an invitation and a challenge. I took a deep breath, feeling the ache of my healing wounds and the weight of all I'd seen. Then I pressed down on the accelerator, heading towards whatever came next, because that's what I do. That's who I am. I'm Tawa Nighthawk, and I hunt monsters. The Hoh Rainforest in Washington state is a place of ancient beauty, where towering Sitka spruces and moss-covered firs create a world unto themselves. It's a place I know well, having spent most of my life guiding tourists through its mist-shrouded paths. My name is Nashoba Blackfeather, and I'm a member of the Yakima Nation. For years, I've shared the stories of my ancestors and the magic of the forest with visitors from all over the world. But there's one story I've never told, one that still haunts me to this day. It was late September, and the forest was transitioning into its autumn splendor. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I had a group of 4 tourists that day, 2 couples from Seattle looking for an authentic wilderness experience. They were your typical weekend warriors, eager for adventure but woefully unprepared for the realities of the deep forest. As we set out that morning, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The forest felt different somehow. The usual chorus of birdsong was muted, and the air seemed heavier than usual. I've always prided myself on being level-headed. They don't call me Steady Nashoba for nothing. But something about that day set my nerves on edge. Our group consisted of Kyle and Jenna, a young couple in their late 20s, and Brian and Emily, who were in their mid-30s. Kyle was the most enthusiastic of the bunch, constantly asking questions about the flora and fauna. Jenna seemed more interested in getting the perfect Instagram shot than actually experiencing the forest. Brian and Emily were quieter, taking in the scenery with a sense of awe. As we ventured deeper into the forest, away from the well-trodden paths, the mist grew thicker. Droplets of water clung to every surface, creating a world that seemed almost otherworldly. The tourists were chattering excitedly, oblivious to the growing silence around us. "Hey, Nashoba," Kyle called out, his voice too loud in the quiet forest. "What's the deal with all this moss? It's everywhere." I explained how the constant moisture in the rainforest creates the perfect environment for moss to thrive. As I spoke, I scanned our surroundings, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. We continued our hike, pushing further into the wilderness. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural canopy that blocked out much of the daylight. The forest floor was a tangle of ferns, fallen logs, and moss-covered rocks. It was mid-afternoon when Jenna asked for a break. "Hey, Nashoba, is this spot okay?" she asked, pointing to a small clearing ahead. I hesitated. The clearing looked innocent enough, bathed in a pale light that filtered through the thick canopy. But something about it felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and a chill ran down my spine. "Sure," I said, pushing aside my misgivings. I didn't want to alarm them over what was probably just my overactive imagination. We settled down in the clearing, the tourists gratefully sinking onto fallen logs and rocks. I remained standing, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The silence was oppressive now, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the canopy above. That's when we heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural noise, unlike anything I'd ever heard in these woods before. The tourists froze, their eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But I knew it wasn't the wind. This sound was alive, primal, and hungry. We sat in tense silence for several minutes, straining our ears for any repeat of the noise. Just as we were starting to relax, thinking it had been a fluke, we heard the snap of branches. It was loud and deliberate, not the kind of sound made by a small animal moving through the underbrush. I stood up, peering into the thick foliage surrounding us. The mist had grown denser, limiting visibility to just a few yards. "Maybe we should head back," Kyle suggested, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by nervous energy. I was about to agree when I saw movement in the shadows of the trees. Something large was moving low to the ground, its movements unnaturally quiet for its size. My heart began to race as I realized we were in serious danger. "Everyone stay close," I whispered, gesturing for the group to gather around me. "We need to move, now." But before we could take a step, it emerged from the shadows. The creature that stepped into the clearing was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was massive, easily the size of a moose, but with a body that seemed to defy nature. Its fur was dark and matted, glistening as if wet. Long, sinewy limbs ended in razor-sharp claws that dug into the soft earth. But it was the head that truly terrified me. It resembled a wolf's, but grotesquely elongated, with a mouthful of jagged teeth that seemed too large for its skull. The creature didn't make a sound as it regarded us with cold, intelligent eyes. It was the stillness that unnerved me the most, the calculated way it seemed to be sizing us up, deciding which of us to take first. For a moment we all stood frozen, the reality of our situation sinking in. Then, operating on pure instinct, I shouted, "Run!" We bolted, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and that thing. But as we ran, I realized with growing horror that the creature wasn't giving chase. Instead, I could hear it moving parallel to us, keeping pace effortlessly as it stalked us through the trees. "We need to split up," Kyle yelled, panic evident in his voice. "No," I shouted back. "We stay together." But it was too late. Kyle and Jenna veered off to the right, disappearing into the mist-shrouded forest. Brian and Emily stayed with me, their breathing ragged and eyes wild with fear. The creature let out a sound then, a low, breathy noise that almost resembled laughter. Then it darted after Kyle and Jenna, moving with impossible speed through the dense undergrowth. I grabbed Brian and Emily, pulling them to a stop. "We're no good to them if we're dead," I hissed, trying to catch my breath. "We need to think." We could hear Kyle and Jenna crashing through the forest, their panicked shouts growing fainter. Then suddenly there was silence, a silence so complete it seemed to swallow up the world around us. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. We needed to get to higher ground, somewhere the creature couldn't ambush us from all sides. I remembered a ridge not far from where we were, a place that might give us a fighting chance. "This way," I whispered, leading Brian and Emily through the forest. We moved as quietly as we could, every snapping twig and rustling leaf sounding like a gunshot in the eerie silence. The mist had thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet in front of us. It felt like we were moving through a dream or a nightmare. As we neared the base of the ridge, I heard Brian cry out in pain. He had tripped, his ankle twisting at an awkward angle. I can't go on," he panted, tears of pain and fear in his eyes. "Just leave me." I shook my head. "We stick together," I said firmly, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. That's when I heard it again, the sound of something large moving through the trees. It was close, too close. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground, gripping it tightly as our only means of defense. The creature stepped into view, its fur now glistening with what I feared was blood. Its jaw hung slightly open, revealing rows of teeth that seemed to go on forever. I didn't wait for it to make the first move. With all the strength I could muster, I swung the branch, connecting solidly with its head. The impact staggered the creature, and it let out a sound that sent shivers down my spine, a mix of a roar and a screech that seemed to shake the very air around us. "Run!" I screamed at Brian and Emily. They didn't need to be told twice, scrambling up the ridge as fast as they could. The creature turned its gaze back to me, its eyes filled with a cold, alien intelligence that chilled me to my core. It lunged, but I managed to roll to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws barely missed me. I scrambled to my feet and bolted after Brian and Emily, my lungs burning with the effort. We made it to the top of the ridge, gasping for air and trembling with exhaustion and fear. The creature stood at the base, pacing back and forth as if considering its next move. For a long, tense moment it stared up at us, then slowly it turned and melted back into the forest. We didn't waste any time. Supporting Brian between us, we made our way back toward the ranger station as quickly as we could. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. By the time we reached the station, night had fallen, and we were on the verge of collapse. The rangers took our story seriously, immediately organizing search parties for Kyle and Jenna. But I knew, deep in my heart, that it was too late for them. Days later, the search parties found their backpacks and shredded clothing near the creek where we had last heard them. There were bones, too, scattered and broken, too many to count. The official report blamed a bear attack, but I know what I saw. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't a bear or a wolf or any animal known to science. It was something older, something that shouldn't exist in our world of smartphones and satellite maps. A creature from a time before men walked these woods, or perhaps a demon from the darkest corners of our legends. I haven't guided anyone since that day. The forest, once a place of peace and connection for me, has become something darker, more dangerous. The evidence was there, the broken branches, the bones, the blood-soaked ground. And while the authorities may not believe my full account, they can't deny that something terrible happened in those woods. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the mist rolls in thick, I think I can hear it, that low, guttural sound echoing through the trees. A reminder that it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I know that one day, someone else will stumble upon its hunting grounds, unaware of the terror that lurks in the shadows of the Hoh rainforest. But I won't be the one to lead them there. My days of guiding are over. Now I can only hope that my story serves as a warning to those who would venture too deep into the wilderness. For in the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, there are secrets best left undisturbed, and creatures that should remain hidden in the mist-shrouded shadows of legend. The first time I saw the thing that killed Ricky, I was ankle-deep in mud and regretting every decision that had led me to that moment. But let me backtrack. My name's Abe Running Wolf. I'm a member of the Blackfeet Nation, born and raised on the reservation in northern Montana, where stories about creatures that stalk the woods aren't just myths, they're warnings. Still, I never thought I'd encounter anything more dangerous than a grizzly, which turned out to be one hell of an underestimation. It all started when my friend Ricky James disappeared. Ricky wasn't the type to vanish without a trace. He was a solid guy, always dependable. We grew up together, shared too many hunting trips to count, and if he didn't come back from one of them, it wasn't because he got lost. So when 3 days went by without anyone hearing from him, a few of us decided to search the forests surrounding Badger Creek. I took the lead, along with a couple of guys from the tribe, Noah Bearpaw and Jimmy Gray Fox. The day was overcast, heavy with the kind of thick, wet air that makes you feel like the sky's pressing down on you. The smell of damp pine and moss filled my lungs as we moved deeper into the woods. Despite the quietness of the others, I couldn't help but feel a growing tension, something in the air that wasn't just the weight of concern for Ricky. It was the woods themselves. They were too quiet, even for this part of the country. We found Ricky's truck about 6 miles in, near an old logging road. The keys were still in the ignition, and his gear was scattered around like he'd left in a hurry. But there was no sign of him, no tracks leading away from the vehicle, nothing that made sense. "You think he wandered off?" Noah asked, his voice low. "No way," I replied. "He would have taken his pack at least." Jimmy scanned the area, his brow furrowed. "This doesn't feel right, Abe." He wasn't wrong. The deeper we ventured into the trees, the more uneasy I became. It was like we were being watched, not by something that belonged in the woods, but by something ancient, something predatory. I tried shaking off the feeling, but it clung to me like the damp air. Hours passed without any sign of Ricky. We were losing daylight when we found the first body. It wasn't Ricky. The man, at least I think it was a man, was torn apart, mauled in a way I'd never seen before. His body had been shredded as if by enormous claws, and his face was frozen in a grotesque expression of terror. It didn't take a forensic expert to know he hadn't stood a chance against whatever attacked him. Noah gagged and turned away while Jimmy muttered something under his breath, crossing himself despite his tribal upbringing. For the first time in my life, I was glad I didn't have a gun. There was no comfort in thinking I could shoot whatever had done this. Bullets weren't going to save us from something that could do that. "We need to go back," Noah said, his voice shaky. "Get more help. Tell the cops." But I couldn't leave, not without Ricky. It was my fault we were here in the first place. "You guys go," I told them. "I'll keep looking." Jimmy started to protest, but I waved him off. "I'll be fine. I know these woods better than anyone." He hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful, Abe." They left, and I continued alone, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The shadows grew long, and the oppressive silence of the forest deepened until I felt like I was the last person alive in the world. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. Still, I pressed on. I found Ricky an hour later, or what was left of him. He was hanging in a tree, gutted like an animal. His torso was ripped open, intestines spilling out, and his limbs were twisted at odd angles. I nearly lost it right there, my stomach lurching at the sight. But something kept me rooted in place, something far worse than the smell of death. Because that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just the forest playing tricks on me, an odd shape in the underbrush, a dark shadow against the trees. But then it moved, and I realized I wasn't alone. The creature emerged from the gloom, moving with an unnatural grace. It stood on two legs, but its body was twisted, like a bear that had been stretched too thin and elongated into something monstrous. Its face was worse, a distorted, nightmarish version of a mountain lion's, with teeth that seemed too large for its mouth. It didn't have fur so much as patches of skin hanging from its frame, exposing raw, bloody flesh beneath. It stood still for a moment, just watching me with eyes I refused to meet. The thing opened its mouth, and a low, chittering noise filled the air. The sound was almost mocking, like it knew I was terrified. I backed away slowly, trying not to provoke it, but every instinct in me screamed to run, and then, as if bored of the game, it lunged forward. I ran. I don't remember much of the chase, just flashes of branches tearing at my clothes, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the forest, heart hammering in my chest. I could hear the creature behind me, its claws scraping the earth, each step closer than the last. I tripped, falling hard into the mud. I rolled over just in time to see it leaping at me, its jaws wide and ready to tear into me. I fumbled for the only weapon I had, a hunting knife, and thrust it upward as it came down. The blade connected with something solid, and the creature let out a hideous screech. It flailed, thrashing wildly as I scrambled to my feet and backed away. I watched as it struggled, impaled on the blade, before finally collapsing to the ground, dead. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at its body. It wasn't until the woods around me started to come alive with sound again, birds chirping, the wind rustling the leaves, that I realized I wasn't going to die. Not today. By the time Noah and Jimmy returned with help, I had dragged Ricky's body down from the tree. They stared in horror at the creature lying next to it, unable to believe what they were seeing. They believed me, though. Everyone did once they saw it for themselves. And when the authorities came, they took the bodies away, both Ricky's and the thing that killed him. They asked me a million questions, but I didn't have many answers. I still don't know what it was or why it chose us. All I know is that it's dead now, and it won't be hunting anyone else. The forest feels different now, quieter, almost like it's breathing a sigh of relief. I haven't been back to that part of the woods since, and I'm not sure I ever will. But sometimes late at night when the wind howls through the trees, I think about Ricky, about the thing that killed him, and I wonder if there's more out there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble into its path. But that's none of my business anymore. It's done. The days following the incident were a blur of police interviews, tribal meetings, and sleepless nights. The authorities were baffled by the creature's remains. Scientists from various fields descended upon our small reservation, each with their own theories and questions. Some thought it was a new species, others a genetic experiment gone wrong. A few even whispered about government cover-ups and conspiracies. For the tribe, it was something else entirely. The elders spoke in hushed tones about old legends, stories passed down through generations about creatures that lived in the shadows of our world. They called it a skinwalker, a shapeshifter that could take on the form of animals or humans. But even they seemed unsure, troubled by the brutality of the attacks and the creature's bizarre appearance. I tried to go back to my normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every sound in the night made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing Ricky's mutilated body or the creature's twisted form lunging at me. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Work at the reservation's small clinic, where I served as a nurse practitioner, became my refuge. I threw myself into long shifts, desperate for anything to keep my mind occupied. But even there, I couldn't escape the lingering effects of what I'd seen. One night, about a week after the incident, an elderly patient came in complaining of chest pains. As I was checking his vitals, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he whispered, his eyes wide and knowing. I tried to brush it off to maintain my professional demeanor, but he wouldn't let go. "The shadows are stirring," he continued, his voice barely audible. "What you killed, it's just the beginning." Before I could respond, he collapsed, his heart monitor flatling. We managed to revive him, but his words stuck with me, adding to the growing weight of unease that had settled over me since that day in the woods. As the weeks passed, strange reports began to filter in from around the reservation. Livestock found mutilated in ways that eerily resembled Ricky's fate. Hikers and campers reporting bizarre noises in the night, describing sounds that sent chills down my spine. The same chittering noise I'd heard from the creature. The tribal council held emergency meetings, debating whether to close off parts of the forest or to seek outside help. I was called in to recount my experience countless times, each retelling, dredging up memories I desperately wanted to forget. Jimmy and Noah, who had been with me that day, were struggling too. Noah had taken to drinking heavily, while Jimmy threw himself into traditional ceremonies, seeking guidance from the spirits. We rarely spoke about what happened, but when we did, it was clear that none of us had found peace. As autumn approached, bringing with it earlier sunsets and longer nights, the tension on the reservation reached a breaking point. A group of tourists went missing in the same area where we'd found Ricky. The search parties came back empty-handed, but with stories that made my blood run cold. They spoke of shadows moving against the wind, of eyes glowing in the darkness, of a presence that seemed to watch their every move. I knew I had to go back. Despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I felt a responsibility to help. I had faced the creature once and survived. Maybe I could do it again. The night before I planned to join the search, I had a vivid dream. I was back in the forest, but everything was different. The trees were twisted and wrong, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The ground beneath my feet pulsed as if alive, and there in the center of a clearing stood not one, but dozens of creatures like the one I'd killed. They were gathered around something, feeding on it with a frenzy that made my stomach churn. As I watched, frozen in horror, one of them looked up and saw me. Its eyes, glowing with an otherworldly intelligence, locked onto mine. And then it spoke, its voice a raspy, inhuman sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You opened the door," it said. "Now we're all awake." I woke up drenched in sweat, the creature's words echoing in my mind. It took me several minutes to calm my racing heart and convince myself it was just a nightmare. But as I sat there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. A warning, perhaps, or a prophecy. The next morning I joined the search party. We ventured deep into the woods, to areas I had sworn I'd never returned to. The forest seemed different now, charged with a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. We searched for hours, finding nothing but an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow our calls. As dusk approached, we prepared to head back. That's when we heard it, a scream that cut through the quiet like a knife, echoing off the trees and sending birds scattering into the sky. Without thinking, I ran towards the sound, ignoring the shouts of the others behind me. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a stop, my breath catching in my throat. There in the fading light was another creature, similar to the one I'd killed but different. Larger, its skin a mottled gray instead of raw flesh. It was hunched over a figure on the ground, and as I watched in horror, it raised its head to look at me. Its jaws were dripping with blood, and in its eyes I saw a cold alien intelligence that froze me in place. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then, with a speed that defied its size, it lunged at me. I dodged, rolling to the side and coming up with my knife in hand. The creature circled me, its movements fluid and predatory. I knew I was outmatched, that my survival last time had been pure luck. As it prepared to attack again, a shot rang out. The creature stumbled, a bloom of blood appearing on its shoulder. More shots followed, and I saw the rest of the search party emerging from the trees, rifles raised. The creature let out a bone-chilling shriek and bolted into the forest, moving faster than anything its size should be able to. We gave chase, but it was like trying to follow a shadow. Within moments, it had vanished into the gathering darkness. We turned our attention to the victim, but it was too late. The tourist, a middle-aged man, had been torn apart just like Ricky. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the days that followed, the reservation became a hotbed of activity. More scientists arrived, along with government agents who asked too many questions and gave too few answers. The tribal elders held long, closed-door meetings, emerging with grim faces and cryptic warnings. I threw myself into research, digging through old tribal records and reaching out to other Native American communities. I found stories, scattered across different tribes and regions, of creatures that matched what we'd seen. Some called them Skinwalkers, others had different names, but the descriptions were eerily similar. One account from a Navajo elder stuck with me. He spoke of a time long ago when the world was younger and the veil between realities was thinner. Creatures from the other side would sometimes slip through, taking on forms that drove men mad. They were sealed away, he said, by powerful medicine men, but the seals were weakening. The world is changing, the elder told me over a crackling phone line. The old ways are being forgotten. The barriers are breaking down. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. Something was happening, something bigger than just our small corner of Montana. As winter settled in, bringing with it long nights and heavy snows, the sightings continued. Not just on our reservation, but in neighboring areas as well. Reports came in of strange tracks in the snow, of livestock found mutilated, of shadowy figures seen at the edge of forests and fields. The tribal council debated closing off large sections of the reservation, but it was a losing battle. We couldn't wall off the entire forest, and whatever these creatures were, they didn't seem bound by normal physical limitations. I started training, pushing my body to its limits. I took up archery again, a skill I'd learned as a kid but had long neglected. I studied survival techniques, wilderness tracking, anything that might give me an edge if I ever encountered one of these things again. Jimmy joined me in my preparations while Noah withdrew further into himself, rarely leaving his house. The strain was taking its toll on all of us, on the entire community. Fear became a constant companion, eroding the bonds that had held our tribe together for generations. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of longer days and new growth, I thought maybe the worst was behind us. The sightings had decreased, and life on the reservation was slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a cool, clear evening in early April. I was walking home from a late shift at the clinic, enjoying the crisp air and the sight of stars emerging in the darkening sky. As I neared my house, I noticed something odd. The streetlights were out, plunging the road into darkness. I quickened my pace, an uneasy feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. That's when I heard it, a low, chittering sound coming from the shadows between houses. I broke into a run, fumbling for my keys as I approached my front door. I never made it. Something hit me from behind, sending me sprawling onto the ground, the wind knocked out of me. As I struggled to catch my breath, I felt a weight on my back, pinning me down. Hot, fetid breath washed over me, and I heard that terrible chittering sound right next to my ear. Adrenaline surged through me. I bucked and thrashed, managing to dislodge whatever was on top of me. I rolled over, scrambling to my feet, and found myself face to face with another creature. This one was different from the others I'd seen. Smaller, more agile, with a lean, almost skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, pale light in the darkness. I reached for my knife only to realize with horror that it must have fallen out of my pocket when I was tackled. The creature seemed to sense my vulnerability, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Just as it was about to lunge, a piercing whistle cut through the night. The creature's head snapped around, its attention diverted. In that moment of distraction, I made a desperate move. I charged forward, ramming my shoulder into its midsection. The impact sent us both tumbling, but I managed to break free and sprint towards the source of the whistle. It was Jimmy, standing in the open doorway of his truck, a strange, intricately carved flute in his hand. "Get in," he yelled, revving the engine. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove into the passenger seat just as Jimmy floored it. The tires squealed as we peeled away, leaving the creature shrieking in frustration behind us. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, my heart still racing. Jimmy's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I've been doing some digging," he said, his voice tight, "talking to elders from other tribes, looking into old stories. That flute? It's supposed to repel skinwalkers and other dark spirits. Didn't think it would actually work." We drove in tense silence for a while, both of us scanning the darkness outside the windows. Finally, Jimmy spoke again. "It's getting worse, Abe. These things, they're showing up all over. Not just here, but on reservations across the country. It's like something's stirring them up, calling them out of hiding." I nodded, a cold weight settling in my stomach. "The old man at the clinic was right," I muttered. "This is just the beginning." Jimmy pulled over at the edge of town, killing the engine. In the silence that followed, the gravity of our situation sank in. We were facing something ancient, something that defied explanation. And it was clear now that it wasn't just our problem anymore. "We need to do something," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm even to my own ears. "We can't just sit back and watch as these things tear our world apart." Jimmy nodded, his face set with determination. "I've been in touch with some people, other tribes, a few outsiders who've encountered similar things. They're talking about forming a group, a coalition to fight back." I thought about Ricky, about the tourists who'd gone missing, about the fear that had taken hold of our community. I thought about the creature's eyes, filled with an intelligence that was utterly alien and undeniably malevolent. "Count me in," I said. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. We were no longer just survivors of a strange encounter in the woods. We were warriors, standing on the front lines of a battle most of the world didn't even know was happening. Over the next few months, we traveled across the country, meeting with others who had encountered these creatures. We shared stories, compared notes, and began to piece together a bigger picture. The creatures weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern, a rising tide of darkness that was threatening to engulf us all. We learned rituals and protective magic from tribal elders, studied tracking techniques from seasoned hunters, and even picked up some unconventional weapons from a group of paranormal investigators. Slowly but surely, we began to push back against the encroaching shadows. But for every victory we achieved, for every creature we managed to drive back or defeat, there seemed to be two more waiting to take its place. It was a never-ending battle, one that took us from the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the swamps of Louisiana, from the deserts of Arizona to the mountains of Appalachia. Through it all, the memory of that first encounter in the Montana woods stayed with me. The sight of Ricky's mutilated body, the sound of the creature's chittering laugh, the feeling of utter helplessness as I ran for my life. These things haunted my dreams and drove me forward. As our network grew, we began to uncover hints of something larger at work. Ancient prophecies spoke of a time when the barriers between worlds would weaken, allowing the creatures of shadow to once again walk the earth. Some believed that human activity, the destruction of natural habitats, the forgetting of old ways, was accelerating this process. Others whispered of a darker possibility, that someone or something was intentionally trying to bring about this catastrophe. The thought sent chills down my spine, but it also steeled my resolve. Whatever was happening, whatever forces were at work, we had to stop them. 1 year after that fateful night on the reservation, our group had grown into a formidable force. We had cells operating in every state, a network of safe houses, and a growing arsenal of both physical and mystical weapons. We'd saved countless lives and driven back numerous incursions of the shadow creatures. But we all knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and the fate of not just our communities but possibly the entire world hung in the balance. As I stood on the porch of our latest safe house, watching the sun set over an unfamiliar skyline, I couldn't help but think back to that day in the Montana woods. How naive I'd been, how unprepared for the horrors that awaited us. But I also remembered the strength I'd found within myself, the courage to face the unimaginable. Whatever came next, whatever nightmares emerged from the shadows, I knew one thing for certain. We would face them together, and we would not go down without a fight. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of chittering laughter. I squared my shoulders and stepped back inside, ready to plan our next move in this endless war against the darkness. Because in the end, that's what it all came down to. Not just survival, but the stubborn, relentless determination to push back against the encroaching night. To stand as a beacon of hope in a world that was growing darker by the day. And as I rejoined my comrades, each of us scarred in our own ways by the battles we'd fought, I felt a surge of pride and determination. We were the thin line between light and shadow, between hope and despair. And no matter what horrors awaited us, we would hold that line. For Ricky, for all those we'd lost, and for all those who still didn't know the danger that lurked in the shadows of their world. The war was far from over, but we were ready. The old RV rattled as I steered it down the winding forest road towards Lake Laconic. The vehicle, a 1985 Winnebago that had seen better days, groaned in protest as we climbed yet another hill. Beside me, Cooper, my loyal golden retriever, panted softly, his nose pressed against the cracked window. The cool autumn air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the city's oppressive smog. My name is James Holbrook, and I'm a freelance writer by trade. For the past few months, I'd been struggling with a severe case of writer's block, missing deadlines and watching my savings dwindle. This trip was supposed to be my salvation, a chance to reconnect with nature, clear my head, and hopefully rediscover my passion for writing. As we rounded a bend, the dense forest suddenly gave way to a breathtaking view of Lake Laconic. The late afternoon sun glinted off the water's surface, turning it into a mirror that reflected the fiery oranges and pinks of the autumn sky. For a moment I forgot about my troubles, mesmerized by the beauty before me. I pulled into a small clearing about 50 yards from the shoreline. It was the perfect spot, close enough to the water for easy access, but far enough back to give us some privacy. As I set about leveling the RV and extending the awning, I noticed an old pickup truck parked about 100 yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of birch trees. The truck was a relic, its once red paint now a patchwork of rust and faded color. The tires seemed to be slowly sinking into the soft earth, as if the forest was gradually reclaiming it. I found myself wondering about its owner. Perhaps it belonged to some old-timer who used the lake as his private fishing spot. With the campsite set up, I unfolded my chair by the water's edge. Cooper sprawled out beside me, his tail thumping contentedly against the ground. I cracked open a beer from the cooler and took a long, satisfying swig. The stress of the city seemed to melt away with each passing moment. As darkness fell, I lit a small campfire and roasted some hot dogs for dinner. Cooper got his share too, of course. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, just the occasional pop and crackle from the fire. It should have been peaceful, but something about the silence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. After dinner, I decided to take a walk around the area, partly to work off the hot dogs and partly to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I grabbed my flashlight and set off along the lake shore, with Cooper trotting along beside me. The moon was nearly full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the trees on the far side of the lake looked like dark sentinels standing guard. As we walked, I noticed something strange: fresh footprints in the mud near the water's edge. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the trail. It led away from the lake and towards the old pickup truck I'd noticed earlier. As we got closer, I saw a faint light coming from inside the truck's cab. My heart began to race. Someone was in there. I crept closer, trying to stay quiet. Cooper, sensing my tension, remained silent at my side. When I reached the truck, I peered through the cracked rear window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man was hunched over in the back seat, surrounded by piles of ratty clothes and empty food cans. He was muttering to himself, his hands moving frantically as if searching for something. In the dim light of a battery-powered lantern, I could see that his clothes were torn and filthy, his hair a matted mess. I backed away slowly, not wanting to alert him to my presence. But as I turned to leave, I heard his mutterings more clearly. The words were still indistinct, but the tone sent shivers down my spine. It was a mix of fear and anger, punctuated by what sounded like quiet sobs. Cooper and I hurried back to the RV. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled down all the shades. My mind was racing. Who was that man? Why was he living in that old truck? Was he dangerous? I turned on the small TV, hoping the noise would drown out my thoughts and calm my nerves. Hours passed, and I found myself drifting off to sleep despite my unease. But just as I was about to succumb to exhaustion, a sound jolted me awake. A soft, hesitant knock on the RV door. My heart leaped into my throat. Cooper was instantly alert, his ears perked and a low growl rumbling in his chest. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I kept by the bed. It could serve as a weapon if needed, and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response came, just another knock, more insistent this time. I said, "Who's there?" I repeated, louder now. Finally a voice answered, weak, raspy, barely above a whisper. "Please, help me." I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. Everything in me screamed that this was a bad idea, that I should call the police or simply drive away. But something in that voice, the raw desperation, made me pause. Slowly I cracked open the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. The man from the truck stood there, looking even more haggard up close. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. "What do you want?" I asked, still not opening the door fully. "Please," he repeated, his voice shaking. "Someone's after me. He's going to kill me. I need help." I weighed my options quickly. We were miles from the nearest town, and cell reception out here was spotty at best. Even if I called the police, it could be hours before they arrived. And if this man was truly in danger... Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. "Come in," I said, stepping back to let him enter. "But I'm warning you, any funny business and you're out. Got it?" He nodded frantically and stumbled inside. I directed him to sit at the small table while I fetched a bottle of water from the fridge. Cooper positioned himself between me and the stranger, his normally friendly demeanor replaced by watchful caution. "What's your name?" I asked as I handed him the water. He gulped it down before answering. "Martin. My name's Martin." "Okay, Martin. Tell me what's going on. Who's after you?" Martin's hands shook as he set down the empty bottle. "I was hiking through the forest a few days ago when I came across this old cabin. It was raining, so I thought I'd take shelter inside. I thought it was abandoned, but..." He trailed off, his eyes going distant. "But what?" I prompted. "There was someone living there, a man. He wasn't right in the head. When he found me, he went berserk. Started screaming about trespassers and thieves. He had a knife." Martin's hand unconsciously went to his side, and I noticed a dark stain on his shirt that I hadn't seen before. "Jesus," I muttered. "Did you go to the police?" Martin shook his head vehemently. "I tried. But he followed me. He knows these woods better than anyone. Every time I thought I'd lost him, he'd show up again. I've been running for days. When I saw your RV, I thought, I hoped." Just then a loud bang resonated through the RV, like something heavy hitting the side. Cooper erupted into furious barking, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "Stay here," I told Martin, grabbing my flashlight and the hunting knife I kept in a kitchen drawer. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The night air was cold, raising goosebumps on my skin. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to create moving shadows at the edge of my vision. I swept the flashlight beam across the clearing, seeing nothing out of place. I was about to head back inside when a low, menacing voice spoke from the darkness. "Where is he?" I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a man, tall and powerfully built. His face was hidden in the shadow of a hood, but I could see the glint of moonlight on the blade of a knife in his hand. "Get out of here," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Leave us alone." The man took a step forward. "Give me the little rat and I'll go, otherwise—" He left the threat hanging in the air. I knew in that moment that there was no reasoning with this man. Whatever had happened between him and Martin, it had pushed him beyond the limits of sanity. I had to protect myself and the terrified man in my RV. I backed towards the door, keeping the flashlight trained on the intruder. Just as my hand found the handle, the man lunged forward with surprising speed. His knife slashed through the air where I had been standing a second before. Instinct took over. I swung the heavy flashlight with all my might, connecting with the side of his head. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. I used that precious moment to dive into the RV, slamming and locking the door behind me. "We need to get out of here now," I yelled to Martin, who was cowering in the corner. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life just as the man outside began pounding on the door, trying to force his way in. I threw the RV into drive and stomped on the gas. We lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft earth before finding purchase. The attackers' enraged shouts faded as we sped away from the campsite, deeper into the forest on the narrow access road. For what felt like hours, we drove through the night. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every bend in the road a potential ambush. Martin sat silently in the passenger seat, jumping at every noise. Cooper paced restlessly in the back, still on high alert. As we drove, my mind raced with questions. Who was this man chasing Martin? What had really happened at that cabin? And most importantly, what had I gotten myself into? The access road seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the forest. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping against the sides of the RV like gnarled fingers. I kept expecting to see headlights in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing but darkness behind us. After what seemed like an eternity, we emerged from the forest onto a main road. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of a small town in the distance. The sign welcoming us to Millbrook, population 2,537, was a welcome sight. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the bright fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the darkness we'd just escaped. "Wait here," I told Martin. I went inside, explained the situation to the startled waitress, and used the phone to call 911. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. I recounted the whole story to the officers. The footprints by the lake, the man in the truck, the attack at the RV. They took Martin into custody, assuring me they would get him the medical and psychological help he clearly needed. As I watched them drive away, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The ordeal was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly finished. The attacker's face, hidden by that hood, haunted my thoughts. He was still out there somewhere in those dark woods, waiting. I spent the rest of the night in the RV, parked under the bright lights of the diner. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move. Cooper stayed by my side, a constant, comforting presence. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my normal life, not yet. The shadow of that night loomed too large. I needed time to process, to heal. I packed up the RV, made sure we had enough supplies, and set off down the highway. I had no destination in mind, just a need to keep moving, to put distance between myself and Lake Laconic. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could find peace again. But for now, all I could do was keep driving, keep fighting the memories, and hope that somewhere down this long road I would find the solace I so desperately sought. As the sun rose higher in the sky, painting the world in warm, comforting colors, I allowed myself a small smile. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. This was going to make one hell of a story. As I drove away from Millbrook, the events of the past night replayed in my mind like a broken record. The fear in Martin's eyes, the menacing figure with the knife, the frantic escape through the dark forest. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had no real destination in mind, so I just followed the highway, putting mile after mile between myself and Lake Laconic. Cooper sat quietly in the passenger seat, his presence a comfort in the uncertainty that stretched out before us. After a few hours of driving, I pulled into a rest stop. My hands were shaking, and I realized I hadn't eaten since the hot dogs by the campfire. As I rummaged through the RV's small fridge, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my agent asking about the progress on my latest manuscript. I stared at the message, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over me. How could I explain that I'd just fled from a knife-wielding maniac in the woods? I ignored the message and made myself a sandwich. As I ate, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Who was Martin, really? And who was the man chasing him? The police had seemed skeptical of my story, and I couldn't blame them. It sounded far-fetched even to my own ears. Over the next few weeks, I drifted from town to town, never staying in one place for more than a couple of days. I told myself I was looking for inspiration, trying to break through my writer's block, but deep down, I knew I was running. From what, I wasn't sure anymore. I tried to write, but every time I sat down at my laptop, my mind went blank. The cursor blinked mockingly at me from the empty page. Instead of the novel I was supposed to be working on, I found myself obsessively researching Lake Laconic and the surrounding area. I learned that the lake had a history of disappearances dating back decades. Most were written off as accidents, hikers getting lost, campers falling victim to the harsh wilderness. But there were whispers of something more sinister. Local forums were full of conspiracy theories and campfire stories about a guardian of the forest that protected its territory with deadly force. As the weeks turned into months, my savings dwindled, and my agent's messages became increasingly frantic. I knew I needed to pull myself together, to move on from that night at the lake. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded figure emerging from the darkness. It was Cooper who finally forced me to confront my fears. We were staying at a campground in Idaho when he got sick. The local vet couldn't pinpoint the cause, but she suggested it might be stress-related. "Animals pick up on our emotions," she told me. "If you're anxious all the time, he's going to feel it too." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized that in my attempt to run from my fears, I'd been dragging Cooper along on this aimless journey. He deserved better. We both did. That night, as Cooper slept fitfully beside me, I made a decision. We were going back to Lake Laconic. I needed to face whatever was waiting for me there, to find answers and put this nightmare to rest once and for all. The drive back felt both longer and shorter than I remembered. As we neared the lake, I could feel my anxiety rising, but there was a sense of purpose now that had been missing before. I arrived at the lake in the early afternoon, the sun high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the water. Everything looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more ordinary. I parked the RV in the same spot as before, half expecting to see the old pickup truck still there. But the clearing was empty, showing no signs of the drama that had unfolded months ago. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the area more thoroughly. Cooper seemed energized by the familiar surroundings, bounding ahead of me as we walked along the lakeshore. I kept a watchful eye out for any signs of disturbance, but the forest seemed peaceful. As we rounded a bend, I spotted something that made me pause. Half hidden by undergrowth was the remnant of an old trail, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. It seemed to lead away from the lake, deeper into the forest. My heart raced as I realized this could be the path Martin had taken, the one that led to the mysterious cabin. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I knew I couldn't leave without knowing the truth. With a deep breath, I started down the overgrown path, Cooper trotting faithfully by my side. The trail wound through the forest, becoming fainter and harder to follow as we went. Just as I was about to give up and turn back, the trees opened up into a small clearing. There, nestled among the pines, stood a dilapidated cabin. Its windows were boarded up, and the roof sagged dangerously, but it was undoubtedly the place Martin had described. I approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was dark and musty, filled with broken furniture and debris. But what caught my eye were the walls. Every available surface was covered in scrawled writing and crude drawings. Most of it was nonsensical, but certain phrases jumped out at me. "They're watching," "The forest knows," "Can't escape the guardian." As I examined the writings more closely, I began to piece together a disturbing picture. The cabin's occupant, I assumed it was the man who had attacked us, seemed to believe he was protecting the forest from outsiders. His ramblings spoke of a sacred duty, of sacrifices needed to appease some ancient force. I was so engrossed in deciphering the wall writings that I almost missed the sound of footsteps outside. Cooper's low growl snapped me back to reality. I spun around, my heart in my throat, to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway. For a moment I was sure it was the hooded man, come to finish what he'd started months ago. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a woman. She was older, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, and she regarded me with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice gravelly but not unkind. "It's not safe." I stammered out an explanation of why I'd come, telling her about Martin and the attack. As I spoke, her expression softened. "I'm Rita," she said when I'd finished. "I'm the park ranger for this area. I've been trying to track down the man who lived here for months." Over the next hour, Rita filled in the gaps in my understanding. The cabin's occupant was a man named Frank Tolliver. He'd been a respected member of the community once, a local historian with a passion for preserving the forest. But over the years, his passion had twisted into obsession. He'd become convinced that the forest was alive, that it needed protection from outsiders at any cost. "We tried to get him help," Rita explained, "but he disappeared into the woods. We only knew he was still out here because of the missing hikers, the strange sightings." I told her about Martin, about how he'd claimed to stumble upon the cabin by accident. Rita nodded grimly. Frank was paranoid. He probably thought Martin was sent to spy on him or something. Poor kid was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. As we talked, I felt the weight of the past months lifting. The mystery that had haunted me was being replaced by a sad but comprehensible reality. Frank wasn't some supernatural guardian of the forest. He was a troubled man who had lost touch with reality. Rita assured me that the police were still searching for Frank, that they were close to tracking him down. She advised me to leave the area for my own safety, but I decided to stay one more night. I needed the closure. That evening, as I sat by my campfire with Cooper, I opened my laptop. For the first time in months, words flowed freely. I wrote about the lake, about Frank and his descent into madness, about the thin line between passion and obsession. I wrote about fear and courage, about facing the unknown. As I typed, I realized that this journey hadn't just been about solving a mystery. It had been about rediscovering my voice as a writer, about confronting my own fears and coming out stronger on the other side. The next morning, as I packed up the RV, I took one last look at Lake Laconic. The water sparkled in the morning sun, beautiful and serene. I knew now that the darkness I'd experienced here wasn't some external force. It was a reflection of our own fears and struggles, our own capacity for both madness and redemption. As Cooper and I headed back toward civilization, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I had a story to tell, and now, finally, I knew how to tell it. The Ouachita National Forest has always been a place of mystery and wonder. As a wildlife researcher from the Choctaw Nation, I've spent countless hours traversing its dense undergrowth, studying the creatures that call it home. My name is Eli Blackwell, and I've dedicated my life to understanding the delicate balance of nature in these remote stretches of Oklahoma. Little did I know that one routine fieldwork trip would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It was early autumn when I set out for my latest expedition. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. I'd been tasked with tracking coyote migration patterns, a project that had been in the works for months. My colleague Maddie Talley, a fellow wildlife biologist, joined me on this trip. We'd worked together before, and I appreciated her sharp mind and comfortable silence. As we drove deeper into the forest, the world around us seemed to close in. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. It was beautiful in a primal sort of way, but there was something else too, a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite explain. We arrived at our designated campsite just before dawn. The location was perfect, a small clearing near a babbling stream, surrounded by towering pines and ancient oaks. As we set up our equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia, a common enough sensation when you're alone in the wilderness. The first few days of our expedition were uneventful. We placed motion-activated cameras at strategic points throughout the forest and checked our humane traps regularly. The work was methodical and familiar, but there was an underlying tension that grew with each passing hour. The forest was quieter than it should have been. The usual cacophony of birdsong and insect chirps was muted, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. On the fourth day, things took a turn for the strange. We found several of our traps triggered but empty. This wasn't entirely unusual. Sometimes animals managed to escape, but the frequency was alarming. What caught our attention, however, were the tufts of coarse, dark fur caught in the mechanisms. It wasn't coyote fur, nor did it match any other animal we expected to find in these woods. "What do you make of this?" Maddie asked, holding up a clump of the mysterious fur for closer inspection. I shook my head, baffled. "I'm not sure. It's too coarse for a coyote, and the color is all wrong for a bear." We collected samples, making a mental note to analyze them when we returned to the lab. As we continued our rounds, the silence of the forest grew more oppressive. The lack of animal sounds was unnerving, to say the least. That night, as we sat around the campfire, Maddie voiced what we'd both been thinking. "Eli, have you noticed how quiet it's been? It's not natural." I nodded slowly, poking at the embers with a stick. "Yeah, I've been feeling it too. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath." We discussed possible explanations, changes in weather patterns, human activity in nearby areas. But none of our theories felt quite right. As we turned in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. The next morning, we woke to find our campsite in disarray. Something had rummaged through our supplies during the night, leaving muddy tracks and bent equipment in its wake. The tracks were like nothing I'd ever seen before, too large for a coyote, but with an odd, elongated shape that didn't match any known predator in the area. "We should call this in," Maddie suggested, her voice tight with concern. I agreed, but when I tried to use our satellite phone, all I got was static. We were truly on our own. As we cleaned up the mess, I couldn't help but feel we were being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig made us jump. We decided to continue our work, but agreed to stay close together and remain vigilant. The day passed without incident, but the tension continued to build. We found more empty traps, more mysterious fur, and an increasing number of those strange tracks. Whatever was out there, it was smart enough to avoid our cameras and skilled enough to escape our traps. As night fell, we huddled around the campfire, discussing our next move. The rational part of my brain insisted that there had to be a logical explanation for everything we'd experienced. Perhaps a new predator had moved into the area, disrupting the ecosystem, or maybe there was some environmental factor we hadn't considered. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. "We should leave," Maddie said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Whatever's out there, it's not something we're equipped to handle." I was about to agree when we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We froze, our eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, at the edge of the clearing, we saw it. The creature that emerged from the shadows defied description. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a patchwork of different animals. Its head was vaguely wolf-like, but with an elongated snout and teeth that protruded at odd angles. The body was lean and muscular, covered in the same coarse, dark fur we'd found in our traps. But its limbs, they were all wrong. Too long, too jointed, moving in ways that no natural creature should. For a moment we just stared at each other, two humans and this impossible being. Then, with a speed that belied its size, it charged. I reacted on instinct, grabbing for the rifle I kept nearby. Maddie was quicker, firing off a flare that illuminated the clearing in harsh red light. The creature recoiled, letting out a shriek that sent chills down my spine. In the brief moment of confusion, I managed to get off 2 shots. The bullets hit their mark, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It lunged forward, its claws raking across Maddie's leg as she tried to scramble away. I fired again, aiming for the head this time. The shot connected with a sickening thud, and the creature dropped to the ground, twitching. We waited, hearts pounding for what felt like an eternity. But it didn't get up. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. Maddie was hurt, bleeding from deep gashes in her leg, and there, just feet away from us, lay a creature that shouldn't exist. We spent the rest of the night in a state of hypervigilance, tending to Maddie's wounds and keeping watch for any sign of more creatures. But the forest remained silent, as if in shock at what had transpired. When dawn finally broke, we made the decision to leave immediately. We packed up our camp as quickly as we could, leaving behind the body of the creature. Part of me wanted to take it with us, to prove to the world what we had seen. But a deeper, more primal part knew that some things are better left undisturbed. The journey back to civilization was tense and quiet. We were both lost in our thoughts, trying to reconcile what we had experienced with our understanding of the natural world. When we finally reached the nearest town, Maddie went straight to the hospital to have her wounds treated. I made my way to our research facility, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. The fur samples we had collected were inconclusive. The DNA didn't match any known species. Our superiors listened to our story with skepticism, suggesting that the stress of fieldwork and isolation had gotten to us. They proposed rational explanations, a bear with mange, a wolf-dog hybrid gone feral. But we knew the truth. Maddie and I didn't speak much about that night. It was as if putting it into words would make it too real, too impossible to ignore. But in the quiet moments, when the memory of that creature's eyes met mine in the firelight, I knew that our understanding of the world had been irrevocably changed. Weeks turned into months, and life gradually returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. I continued my research, but I never went back to that part of the Ouachita National Forest. Some places, I've learned, are better left unexplored. But on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees and the shadows seem to move of their own accord, I find myself thinking about what else might be out there, hiding just beyond the edge of what we know. And I wonder, not for the first time, if there are some mysteries that are better left unsolved. The experience in the Ouachita National Forest left an indelible mark on both Maddie and me. While we tried to move on with our lives and careers, the memory of that night lingered, coloring every aspect of our work and personal lives. Maddie's physical wounds healed, but the psychological impact was profound. She became more withdrawn, jumpy at unexpected noises, and reluctant to venture into the field. Eventually, she decided to leave fieldwork altogether, taking a position in a laboratory where she could analyze data without having to face the unpredictability of the wilderness. As for me, I couldn't let it go. The encounter had awakened a burning curiosity in me, a need to understand what we had seen and what it meant for our understanding of the natural world. I threw myself into research, poring over old folklore, cryptozoology texts, and indigenous legends, searching for any mention of creatures that matched what we had encountered. My obsession didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues began to whisper behind my back, questioning my mental state and the validity of my work. But I couldn't stop. I knew what I had seen, and I was determined to find answers. Months passed, and my research led me down increasingly obscure paths. I reached out to other researchers who had reported strange sightings, exchanging theories and comparing notes. Most of these conversations led nowhere, but a few provided tantalizing hints that what we had encountered wasn't entirely unique. One particularly intriguing lead came from an elderly Choctaw elder who lived on the outskirts of the forest. When I shared a sanitized version of our experience, his eyes widened with recognition. He spoke of old stories, passed down through generations, of shape-shifting creatures that lived in the deepest parts of the forest. These beings, he said, were neither fully animal nor spirit, but something in between, guardians of the wild places, protectors of nature's secrets. The elder's words resonated with me, fitting with the sense of wrongness we had felt in the creature's presence. It wasn't just that it was unknown, it felt like it didn't belong in our world, like it had stepped out of some parallel reality where the laws of nature worked differently. As my research progressed, I began to form a theory. What if there were places in the world where the boundaries between realities were thin? Areas where creatures from other dimensions could slip through, appearing as monstrous amalgamations to our eyes? It was a wild idea, bordering on the fantastical, but it was the only explanation that seemed to fit all the pieces. My work began to attract attention, not all of it welcome. I received anonymous emails warning me to stop my research, and once I returned home to find my apartment had been searched, my notes and computer missing. The message was clear. Someone didn't want this information getting out, but I couldn't let it go. The memory of that night in the forest, the creature's eyes meeting mine in a moment of impossible understanding, drove me forward. I knew there was more to the story, more to uncover. A year after our encounter, I decided to return to the Ouachita National Forest. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not my colleagues, not Maddie, not even my family. I knew they would try to stop me, and I couldn't risk that. This was something I had to do alone. As I drove down the familiar roads leading into the forest, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I set up camp in a different area from our previous expedition, but the feeling of being watched was immediate and intense. For days I hiked through the forest, setting up cameras and recording equipment, hoping to catch some evidence of the creature's existence. The silence that had unnerved us before was back, but this time it felt expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. On the fifth night, as I sat by my campfire reviewing the day's footage, I heard it, the same low guttural growl that had haunted my dreams for the past year. My heart raced as I slowly turned, half expecting to see the creature standing at the edge of the clearing. But there was nothing there, just darkness and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I spent the rest of the night on high alert, my hand never far from my rifle. But nothing appeared. As dawn broke, I began to wonder if I had imagined it, if my desire for answers had finally pushed me over the edge into delusion. It was then that I noticed something odd about the ground near my tent. There, pressed into the soft earth, was a single footprint. It matched the ones we had seen a year ago, too large for any known predator, with that same elongated, unnatural shape. With shaking hands, I took photos and measurements, my mind racing with the implications. The creature was real. It was still out there. And for some reason, it had chosen to reveal itself to me. As I packed up my camp, I felt a mix of emotions, excitement at the confirmation of what we had seen, fear of what it might mean, and a deep unsettling feeling that I was now part of something much larger than myself. I knew that going public with this evidence would be risky. There were clearly people who wanted this information suppressed, and I had no illusions about the danger I might be putting myself in. But I also knew that I couldn't keep this to myself. The world needed to know what was out there, hiding in the shadows of our so-called civilization. As I drove out of the forest, I made a decision. I would compile all my research, all the evidence I had gathered, and release it to the public. Let the world decide what to make of it. If there were forces trying to keep this hidden, then bringing it into the light was the best protection I could hope for. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever see that creature again, or if I'll find the answers I've been searching for. But I do know that my experience in the Ouachita National Forest has changed me forever. It has opened my eyes to the possibility that our world is far stranger, far more mysterious than we ever imagined. And so I continue my work. I continue to search for answers, to push the boundaries of what we know. Because out there in the deep, dark places of the world, there are secrets waiting to be uncovered. And I intend to find them. As the years passed, my life became a delicate balance between pursuing the truth and staying under the radar of those who sought to suppress it. I published my findings under a pseudonym, carefully omitting any details that could lead back to me or the specific location in the Ouachita National Forest. The response was mixed. Some dismissed it as elaborately crafted fiction, while others saw it as groundbreaking research into undiscovered species. I continued my work as a wildlife researcher, but my focus had shifted. Every expedition, every study, became an opportunity to look for signs of the unexplained. I developed a network of like-minded individuals, other researchers, cryptozoologists, and even a few open-minded government officials who shared information discreetly. Maddie and I drifted apart over the years. She couldn't understand my obsession, my need to keep digging into something she'd rather forget. I couldn't blame her. The encounter had affected us both deeply, but we'd chosen different paths to deal with it. 5 years after our initial encounter, I received an encrypted email from an anonymous source. The message was brief, but it sent chills down my spine. "They're not just in Ouachita. Meet me at the coordinates below. Come alone." Against my better judgment, I decided to go. The coordinates led me to a small diner in a nondescript town in Montana. As I sat in a booth, nursing a cup of coffee and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, a man slid into the seat across from me. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged, with graying hair and tired eyes, but there was an intensity to him that immediately put me on edge. "You're the one who's been asking questions," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, wary but curious. "And you have answers?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I have some of them, but more importantly, I have a proposal for you." Over the next hour, he laid out a story that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He claimed to be part of a secret government task force dedicated to investigating and containing what he called reality incursions, places where the fabric between dimensions wore thin, allowing creatures and phenomena from other realities to slip into our world. "What you encountered in Ouachita," he explained, "was just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of these hotspots across the country, maybe hundreds worldwide, and they're increasing in frequency." I listened, my mind reeling with the implications. It was one thing to suspect the existence of these creatures, but to have it confirmed and on such a scale was overwhelming. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, once he had finished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because we need help. There aren't enough of us to monitor all these sites, to contain what's coming through. We've been watching you, Eli, your research, your dedication. We think you could be an asset to our team." I sat back, processing his words. Part of me was elated. This was everything I'd been searching for, a chance to uncover the truth on a scale I'd never imagined. But another part, the cautious researcher in me, was skeptical. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate hoax?" I asked. "Or worse, a trap?" He nodded as if he'd been expecting this question. "I can show you proof, but not here. If you're interested, meet me at these coordinates in 3 days. He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Come alone and tell no one." With that, he stood and left, leaving me with a decision to make. Those 3 days were some of the longest of my life. I weighed the risks against the potential rewards, knowing that either way, my life would never be the same. In the end, curiosity won out. I had come too far, seen too much to turn back now. The coordinates led me to a remote research facility hidden in the mountains. As I approached, I half expected to be turned away or worse. Instead, I was greeted by the man from the diner and ushered inside. What I saw over the next few hours defied belief. They had specimens creatures like the one we'd encountered in Ouachita, but also others, each more bizarre than the last. There were detailed reports of encounters, maps showing the locations of known incursion points, and even video footage of these beings in their natural habitats. "This is why we need you," my guide explained. "Your background in wildlife biology, your experience with these entities, you're uniquely qualified to help us understand them." I spent the next week at the facility learning about their work and the true scope of what we were facing. It wasn't just about strange creatures. There were reports of time slips, gravity anomalies, even entire landscapes that seemed to shift and change when no one was looking. As my visit came to an end, I was faced with a choice: return to my old life, armed with this new knowledge but sworn to secrecy, or join their ranks and dedicate myself fully to unraveling these mysteries. The decision in the end wasn't difficult. I knew I could never go back to my old life, not with what I now knew. I agreed to join them, on the condition that I could continue my own research and maintain some level of autonomy. The years that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and danger. We traveled across the country, investigating reports of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. I saw things that challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world and about reality itself. There were close calls, moments when we came face to face with beings that defied description, entities that seemed to operate on laws of physics unknown to our science. But there were triumphs, too. We managed to establish communication with some of the less hostile entities, learning about their worlds and the nature of the barriers between realities. As our understanding grew, so did the challenges we faced. We weren't the only ones aware of these incursions. There were other groups, some governmental, some private, who sought to exploit these phenomena for their own gain. We found ourselves not just studying and containing these anomalies, but also protecting them from those who would use them as weapons or tools for profit. Through it all, I never forgot that night in the Ouachita National Forest. In a way, that encounter had set me on this path, opening my eyes to a world of possibilities I never could have imagined. And while the work was often dangerous and always unpredictable, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Today, as I write this account, I do so with a mix of caution and hope. The world is changing, the boundaries between realities growing thinner with each passing year. I don't know what the future holds, but I believe that understanding these phenomena is crucial to our survival as a species. To those who read this and recognize something of their own experiences in my words, know that you're not alone. There are others out there seeking the truth, working to protect our world from threats we're only beginning to understand. And if you're brave enough, if you're willing to question everything you think you know about reality, there's a place for you in this fight. As for me, I'll continue my work, exploring the edges of the known world and the shadowy realms beyond. Because out there, in the spaces between realities, lie answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. And I intend to find them, no matter where they may lead. This happened to me and my cousins around a decade ago when I was 16 and my cousins were 13 and 10. We'll call them Bill and Ramon. We had gone on a camping trip with their dad, who I'll refer to as Roger, to the Appalachian wilderness and engaged in your average camping activities, like fishing, hiking, and sitting around campfires to tell ghost stories before turning in for the night. We had initially planned to stay out for longer than a week, which in the beginning was a very pleasant experience, marked by warm, sunny weather and breezy, starlit summer nights. However, around the fourth day, things started to take a turn for the strange and downright terrifying. It was in the evening, and we were sitting around the fire, talking and laughing loudly, just your typical tumultuous adolescence. We roasted marshmallows while Roger was making dinner when I decided to get a picture of myself standing in front of the dark woods, holding a large brook trout that I had caught earlier that day. This detail will be important later. Around 11 p.m., the radio that had been playing suddenly began to falter into static, causing Bill to smack it repeatedly in a misguided attempt to get it back to work, which it didn't. An eerie silence overtook the campsite, only occasionally broken by the periodic crackling of the fire. Even the nocturnal choir of frogs and crickets had been completely extinguished, along with our own racket. I remember the tense feeling of being watched as shivers ran down my arms and spine. Ramon, being the youngest, held on to his father, who tried to break the unsettling silence with an inappropriately cheerful "let's eat." We turned in soon after eating, though it was distinctly hard to sleep with the deafening silence and the persistent feeling of being watched still hanging over me. The next day started off well enough. Birds were chirping and the fresh morning breeze was gently swaying the leaves around us. We had breakfast and headed out for our planned hike. I was feeling much better than the night before and had set out looking forward to the woodland adventure. It was late in the afternoon when we finally stopped to eat lunch in a clearing, surrounded by the forest and its sounds. As we were eating, though, I felt goosebumps along my back and arms, just like last night, and the feeling of being watched overtook me. From the looks of it, Roger and my cousins were also overcome with an uneasy feeling. As if synchronized with our discomfort, the birds also halted their singing as silence befell our hike. Tense and tired, we decided to make our way back. The entire time, the dreadful feeling of being observed only growing as we approached the lake. Making our way down the hiking path and reaching the bank of the lake, we stopped when we heard a rustle in the distance. Roger held his hand up as if to motion us to stop and be quiet while he nervously scanned the vicinity. Again, we heard a rustle, only this time much more vigorous and seemingly closer, as if something were stalking us from within the tall grass nearby. Roger, who was holding a gun, was now on full alert, as he was expecting a black bear. His stance and seriousness frightened me, as my cousins and I huddled together near Roger. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity until, finally, Roger decided the coast was clear. I had spent another restless night, haunted by silence. The following day, however, was the most fun I had the whole trip. In the morning we had gone fishing out in the lake and I caught another large fish, and after we spent the rest of the day swimming until late in the afternoon. We had arrived at the campsite around dusk, as I specifically remember the dramatic hues of orange and yellow that painted the sky in resplendent watercolor. Crickets and frogs were resonating their characteristic serenades as we approached, coming back from a day of fishing and swimming. We were laughing and stumbling as we carried our fishing gear down the trail, with Roger leading the way. Before we stepped into the campsite, Roger stopped dead in his tracks, causing me and my cousins to crash into him and each other, though he, a gargantuan man, didn't even seem to flinch. We looked at each other, baffled, and then we peeked out from behind him to find something which caused my legs to tremble in fear. There, right in the very center of our campsite, erected over the ashes of our long-extinguished campfire, was what I could only describe as the second most horrifying sight of my life. A grotesque effigy apparently made of thousands of small twigs that had been banded together to form a torso and 4 limbs. At the end of both arms, twisted branched had been contrived into hands, and perched atop the torso was a large deer skull, which was seemingly smeared or painted with strange crimson-colored symbols. From its large, menacing antlers hung several small wooden trinkets fashioned into symbols which looked like the ones painted on the skull. After soaking in the dire situation, Roger snapped into action and gripped his gun, which had been swung over his shoulder. Like a drill sergeant, he ordered Bill and me to pack as much as we could as fast as we could while he started the truck, instructing us to leave anything heavy, including the tents. I had never moved so fast in my life. We left nearly everything non-essential as we haphazardly threw our belongings in the truck. Meanwhile, Roger was standing watch, gun ready, as Ramon was crying in the car. Shortly after, we sped away down the dirt path, surrounded by the soundless woods. A few days after arriving home, I had remembered about that photo I took with the brook I caught fishing. I wish I had never remembered about that photo. After downloading the pictures from my digital camera, I found the photo I was looking for. There I was, cheerfully holding my catch, illuminated by the warm light from the campfire. But something behind me had caught my eye, something I had missed while looking in the camera's screen. Hidden in the gloom of the dark forest was a faint glimpse of a partially illuminated head. After increasing the brightness on the image, I almost fell backward in pure terror. Right there, looking at me, was what appeared to be a menacing human-like face, with ghostly white skin, dark sunken eyes, a flared nose, and what appeared to be antlers protruding from both sides of its bald head. If the effigy it had left on our camp was the second most horrifying thing I've ever seen, this nightmarish photo would certainly take the first spot. One thing's for sure, I will never go camping like that again.